Everyone, there is no relief on the Canadian political scene for somebody who is not saying that vaccines are the only way out. Yesterday, I painstakingly went through the idea that the vaccine may not actually stop transmission of the virus. It may just stop symptoms, but you have to take 2 doses, and both doses make you sick. So why would you do this for a virus that has a 99% survival rate and for a vaccine that won't actually meaningfully cut down the transmission rate? Very, very strange. Why would we do this? Anyway, the National Post is reporting, and the reason I'm telling you about this story is 2 reasons. One, the positioning is Derek Sloan's sponsoring this anti-vaccine petition, and therefore Derek Sloan is anti-vaccine, where he's already stated that he sponsors petitions in order to give his constituents a voice, and he views parliamentary petitions as a vehicle to do that. So he doesn't necessarily agree or disagree. So the article is disingenuous in its title. But anyway, Conservative MP Derek Sloan's, and the second one is to show you Aaron O'Toole is right on board with the vaccines. Here we go. Conservative MP Derek Sloan's anti-vaccine petition, a symptom of Liberal failings, Aaron O'Toole. Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole says he disagrees with a petition before the House of Commons sponsored by a member of his caucus that calls into question the science behind COVID-19 vaccines. O'Toole says he has faith in Health Canada and the advice provided by Canada's chief public health official. And I'll show you that in just a second. Here's Aaron O'Toole answering a question on, do you trust Dr. Theresa Tam? And he says, yes. And every time I've seen him asked a question like this, he has given full-throated endorsement to Dr. Tam and to the Health Canada and said we have to listen to our healthcare professionals. He hasn't talked about lockdown measures. He hasn't talked about anything that you would think a conservative leader would be talking about, the concerns of the constitutional or charter challenges to the lockdowns, charter challenges to locking people up, charter challenges to just locking healthy people up, charter challenges to telling people that you can't get together with your families and your friends, et cetera, et cetera. Also, all the fines for protesting, Randy Hilliers, et cetera, the fines for opening your restaurants and stuff. These are all unconstitutional. I can believe that he's not talking about it. But a conservative leader, usually the base would demand it. And is the base that neutered? Really? Really? Nobody cares? Nobody cares that the leadership, the representation in the House of Commons is more interested in supporting Dr. Theresa Tam, who's been wrong every time, right? Every single time.
Your predecessor, Andrew Scheer, was asked a number of times if he trusted the advice of Dr. Tam, and he never gave us a straight answer. So I'd like to get your opinion. Do you trust the advice that Dr. Tam gives Canadians?
Yes, I do, Mackenzie. And in fact, every briefing, every chance I've had to be briefed by Dr. Tam, I've thanked her and the Health Canada team for their work throughout a pandemic. All Canadians have been working incredibly hard, and people in public.
We thank them and their team for working hard, and everybody's been working hard. Wow, what a pivot. What a pivot, right? Do you trust her? Oh, of course we trust her. She's never been wrong. Everybody's working hard, right? Intention doesn't mean results, right? Like you could have meant to do something, but if the result was you allowed the virus into the country, you didn't shut down the borders are still open, you shamed everybody for being racist when they were valid concerns being brought forward, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You gave away all the PPE in February, right? Like to China. And then we bought a whole bunch of PPE, and that appears to have been a money laundering scam. Look in the BC health spending scandal, that's going on right now. And there's other concerning instances in Ontario and other places too. There's a lot wrong with the response that Canada had. There's a lot wrong with the monetary response. There's a lot wrong with what Canada did, what Canada is continuing to do. And Justin Trudeau, Aaron O'Toole. Oh, yes, I trust them. Yes, thank you. Yes, very good question, Mackenzie. I mean, first, that's a little bit patronizing, right? The use of the name there, that's a power move, right? Like using somebody's name. It's kind of like, I'm dominant, Mackenzie, right? But like, yes, I do, Mackenzie. How dare you ask me? It's just really interesting. Anyway, we've been having a talk about mandatory vaccines. And usually when they say you can't mandate something, then that also means like the government, or excuse me, the employers can't be like, this is mandatory for your employment. However, it seems like that's exactly what's happening. The government is saying, we're not going to mandate it, but there's maybe some things that you're not able to do, like everything, if you don't have this vaccine. And The vaccine has been developed in less than a year. I don't think we have a viable coronavirus vaccine that is good every year. The flu vaccine is reworked every year, right? And sometimes people have adverse reactions to that. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's a worse flu year. Sometimes the vaccine misses the flu genome, right? So I've heard coronavirus has already mutated 30 times, right? Who know? Corona 87, right? Like, oh no, right? Corona 84 maybe. Or COVID 84. So what good is this vaccine if it makes you sick when you take it for a virus that may or may not make you sick, that 99% of people plus will survive in most age groups, that now that we have to have passports to go around in like hospitals and long-term care, that's what everybody keeps talking about, but it's a slippery slope, right? Soon it'll be hospitals, long-term care, and Costco, and then hospitals, long-term care, Costco, and Chapters, and then everywhere. Because, Costco and Chapters just got away with it, so why not, right? Us too. It's frustrating. Anyway, those who don't get COVID-19 vaccine could face restrictions, Ontario officials say. Ontario's health minister says getting a coronavirus vaccine won't be mandatory, but those who don't receive a shot could face restrictions. Christine Elliott made the remarks during an update on the province's COVID-19 vaccine distribution plans on Monday. Here are these remarks. This is Joe Warmington being specific. This is yesterday. Today's the 8th. Here we go.
About as well.
You mentioned it won't be mandatory. I have heard talk that there's discussion around restrictions on where people can go, what activities they can do if they don't get a vaccine. Are those kinds of restrictions being considered?
Yes, absolutely. And we are considering all of those issues right now. But if people choose not to receive the vaccine, then they may not be able to do certain things. But that will be their choice.
It will be your choice. If your employer says you will get a vaccine or you won't get paid, or your kids won't be able to go to school, or you will not receive medical care, but it's your choice. Is it really your choice? This government, all of them need to go. Every single level of government needs to go. No one is looking at the real data here. And I'll show you, Guelph has 7 people in the hospital now. Should 7 people in the hospital necessitate a full lockdown? Should 7 people in the hospital necessitate moving up to the next level? Has anywhere in Ontario moved down from a high level? Have we seen people in lockdown come into red or green territory? No, I haven't heard of that. 4 places in Ontario have got the virus under control and they're in yellow, now green. Yay, everybody's worked hard and blah, blah, blah. No, there's more tests. Now they're doing asymptomatic testing in schools. Asymptomatic testing. Healthy people, come here, let me swab your brain and tell you if you've got COVID-19. I feel fine. It doesn't matter if you feel fine. You work in a school and you're a risk. Come here and let me test you. Okay, you have COVID-19. Right? Shocking. This looks like the Sean Connery guy from when, I can't remember who was doing who was doing Sean Connery on Celebrity Jeopardy on Saturday Night Live. Sorry, that took a minute to get out, but he looks exactly like the Sean Connery Celebrity Jeopardy guy. Anyway, here's about, 30 seconds of this. They're all talking about, oh yeah, definitely, we should definitely restrict people who don't have the vaccine. The vaccine, I'll show you in a minute. Here we go.
It's possible that you'll see countries at a national level saying if you want to be able to come into our country that you have to have proof of vaccination. I think that's something that we'll likely see. So, there could be consequences in terms of, say you're in a frontline service job and you don't want to get vaccinated. Maybe you can't be in that job. I think there are a bunch of things that will be quite compelling for people to get vaccinated, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be forced to. It's just, I think, going to be highly encouraged. And I think there could be consequences for those who choose not to.
Yeah.
If you want a job, you're going to get the vaccine, but it's not mandatory. That's just highly encouraging. If you want a job, if you want to stay in your job, say you're frontline service or, staff at St. Maron Foods Cornwall. Here's a tweet, staff at St. Maron's Foods in Cornwall called to a meeting by managers. Staff can refuse the vaccines, as is their right, but they will be immediately fired, sacked. I don't know if this is in Canada. Let's see. I'm not sure if this is in Canada, but it says Victoria, so I don't know. It could be Australia. Who knows? But concerning, right? Concerning. I'm gonna continue to play this. Other people weigh in on this. Really, he really does look like the Sean Connery.
Chris, I know you've talked about on the House those consequences. There's a lot of conversation happening right now about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Corey's hit one of the key points here. Mobility is a big part of how the modern day economy works. And if countries want you to have a vaccine to get entry into their country, that's going to be a strong impetus for people to get vaccinated. Schools, for example, may very well decide that in order to risk or limit the risk of transmission, you need to be vaccinated. The one thing I'm kind of watching for here is just how effective are these vaccines going to prove to be? Is one shot going to last 3 months, 3 years, 10 years? We don't really, right, we don't know the answers to those questions yet.
And the way that Donald Trump was speaking, he said, they say you're immune for the rest of your life once you've had it. So I'd be interested to see the makeup of the vaccines. Did you see the slippery slope? So though they started on talking about travel into the country or travel out of the country. It won't be mandatory unless you're landing in another country. And then he said schools and, well, I mean, the guy right off the hop was saying, maybe if you've got a server job, you might have to be vaccinated if you want to keep your job, right? You want to keep working there, buddy? You want to keep your apartment? Yeah. You want to keep those tips? You got to get vaccinated, right? Here is Jerry Agar, and he's a Toronto Sun columnist, and he says pandemic freedom fighters need to get over themselves. The whole premise for his article here is no authority is threatening to make the vaccine mandatory. The petition comes from a false premise and as such is suspect in its aims, and its aims unhelpful. So this is the Derek Sloan petition, and so I'll give a bit of prep before that. I guess I should have given a bit more. He says, hey, freedom fighters, you've created your own false enemy. Conservative MP Derek Sloan is driving more of a wedge between Canadians than what is already there. He is motivating the hysteria of people already panicked about how the country is handling the pandemic. A government e-petition that Sloan has sponsored implores the government of Canada to, 1, preserve and protect our ethical, legal, and moral right to informed consent, and 2, legally ensure COVID-19 vaccines are voluntary. This choice must be without disadvantage or prejudice. That means they can't take away your job if you choose not to get a vaccine. How many people do you know that didn't have the MMR but can't work at Costco, right? Can't work at Taco Bell, right? Because they don't have their MMR vaccine or their measles vaccine, right? You have a right to refuse and to stay employed, right? You are not an infectious agent if you are healthy, and they cannot argue otherwise, although they're currently making people believe otherwise. Also, the petition alleges that the act of injecting people with a vaccine that's not fully tested is experimenting on humans, which is specifically prohibited by the Nuremberg codes. So I said Nuremberg, not Nuremberger. I think that it's very interesting that we've got Sun columnists who are taking that position that, stop being whiny about that vaccine and just take your medicine. There are some serious concerns about this vaccine. I'll show you a few of them. But first, this is interesting. Trudeau was asked if First Nations in isolated northern communities will be a priority to get the vaccine first. But if the communities are isolated, how are they at top risk? This is a race-based policymaking at its worst, but they'll sell it as a virtue. It's not. Here's UK is getting a head start after the British regulators on December 2nd gave emergency authorization to the vaccine produced by US drug maker Pfizer and Germany's BioNTech. And apparently we're going to get 245,000 doses, says Trudeau. He made some phone calls, had some connections. Here's the first person in Britain, I guess, to get this. And it says, go for it, says grandmother who got world's first Pfizer COVID vaccine in Britain. And the reason I flagged this one was because of the replies. Somebody said the intramuscular. First, the nurse isn't wearing gloves or a protective apron, no plastic apron or anything to that effect. But somebody talked about, hold on. Here. Wrong technique. Squeezing the skin is done for subcutaneous injection, not an intramuscular one. You'd think for this photo op, they could have found someone competent to do the shot. Apparently not. She's not wearing gloves. Did you wash your hands? I mean, she's got a mask on. You can see the mask loop here. But no plastic PPE? Really? Like, I'm the first person to get the shot. This is a photo op. What are we doing here? Switzerland's medical regulators, Swiss Medic, says it lacks necessary info to sign off on 3 different COVID-19 vaccines from Pfizer, BioNTech, AstraZeneca, and Moderna. Swiss Medic said important data on safety, efficacy, and quality are still missing. Oh! And Justin Trudeau was asked by Brian Lilley, just asked about the issue of liability. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sidesteps and simply says that vaccines are only approved once Health Canada has done its own examination and that everyone is covered. How are you covered? Is the company liable if anything goes wrong? He doesn't say. You trust Patty Haydu, right? To make sure that the vaccine is effective and the quality are still good, right? and safety data is complete, right? You trust Patty Haydu to do at least as good a job as Switzerland's doctors did, right? She's a doctor, right? No, she's not a doctor. She's a graphic designer. Oh, here's this. According to the UK's independent newspaper, Pfizer's owner of the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine, the BioNTech one, has been giving indemnity in the United Kingdom, which means people who suffer damage from the vaccine will not be able to sue Pfizer. Oh, so Canada, it doesn't want to answer that question. Switzerland doesn't want to approve the vaccine. And in the United Kingdom, who's got the nurse injecting with the wrong technique and no PPE, they can't sue for any damage. So it doesn't really matter if it's injected correctly because there's no culpability, no accountability, no nothing, right? Doesn't matter. Nobody's going to get in trouble. They learned their lesson from the 2009 H1N1. They don't want to pay those bills again. Chris Selly says pandemic data is too important for governments to keep hidden from us. Oh, Chris, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, man, but they're hiding a lot more than just data from us. It has been 2 weeks since 3.1 million Torontonians and 1.6 million more in an adjacent Peel region were thrust back into what the Ontario government calls lockdown. Montreal has been classified as a red zone where the province's harshest restrictions are in place since the end of September. You can't socialize outside of your household, eat out, even on a frigid, windswept patio, or practice or play team sports in either of the nation's biggest cities. Ontario's lockdown provisions also ban personal services such as haircuts and pedicures, non-essential retail, and all indoor recreation. If these restrictions are having a positive effect on new case counts, it is being overwhelmed. Montreal's average daily case counts has been higher every day inside the red zone than it was outside. As of Sunday, it was nearly 90% higher. On November 23rd, when the lockdown came into effect in Toronto and Peel, the two regions combined were seeing a 7-day average of 861 cases per day. As of Saturday, the number was 987. Lockdown defenders in Ontario are now performing the traditional pivot from it's too soon to expect to see improvements to it would have been worse otherwise. And here's a tweet that says exactly that. I thought it was kind of funny because he's wrong. The message from Dr. Yaf is the impact of the Peel and Toronto lockdowns is that the numbers could have been a lot worse in the time since they were imposed. So this is the reason that I say that numbers don't matter, because they have this pivot in their back pocket. They'll just say, oh, don't worry, like it could have been so much worse. Good thing we did this because it could have been so much worse. But they may be right, back to the article, but there remains little hard evidence to back them up, right? There isn't any hard evidence to back them up. In the 2 weeks since Toronto and Peel were locked down, the percentage of cases with no known epidemiological link crept up to over 50%. That is to say, public health officials have no concrete idea where more than half the cases are being transmitted or received. Oh, what's the false positive rate, everyone? 50% at least? But they know where it's not happening, and so do their colleagues in Quebec, in cinemas, casinos, restaurants, and bars, for example. These are precisely the sorts of places that pro-lockdown folks tend to demand closed in the shrillest of terms, and the public health officials are generally quickest to shut down. Yaf essentially concedes that that's just nibbling at the edges of the problem at best. Restaurants have been leading the resistance in both provinces, demanding proof that they're a significant problem, understandably in a country where governments constantly bang on about evidence-based policy, but they haven't gotten it. And what's worse, governments have clearly been hesitant to tip their hand. More recently, Ontario's small retailers have been demanding to know why Walmart, Costco, and other big box grocers are allowed to sell jeans, televisions, and more non-essential items to in-person shoppers where smaller retailers aren't. In response, Bonnie Crombie, mayor of Mississauga, which is in Peel region, proposed forcing Walmart and Costco only to sell groceries. But there is little evidence retail environments of any kind are a significant risk in Ontario. Just 214 outbreak-related cases have been traced to them. So it's interesting to me that the shrill people calling for the closures of restaurants are the same shrill people calling for fairness and having Walmart cover non-essential items. It's not a coincidence, right? I don't believe in those so much anymore. Hamilton, Ontario is a rare jurisdiction that provides the simple facts, the date an outbreak started and finished, the name of the institution or establishment in question, and the number of cases among staff members and visitors linked to it. Just 10 out of 757 outbreaks related cases in that city have been linked to restaurants. It's awkward. But maximum transparency is still and always the right approach, especially when governments are asking people to trust them more than usual, to risk their very livelihoods based on the experts' best guesses and crossed fingers. The data might not be there to support their approach, but keeping it hidden can only heighten tension and suspicion and undermine their already dubious notion that we're all in this together. Yes, do you still believe that? And here's the tweet saying, "Oh, it's not as bad as it could have been." Yeah. It's false. The data is false. December 7th is 7 days. December is 7 days along, and we've already reported over 4,100 new COVID-19 cases. I was going to use that tab to disprove this tab, right? He says, oh, the numbers, they're not up steeply in the last 10 days. Okay, sure. Is that what that graph says? Reflecting on the data from Kelly Brown, I realized how close Toronto is to herd immunity. I suspect our political leaders know this, which is why they are working feverishly hard to get a vaccine out. A couple of more months and the vaccine would be clearly unnecessary. And is it not clearly unnecessary now? I mean, I think that it is clearly unnecessary now. Right? Like we're in a situation where the leadership is not paying attention to what the public wants. Pundit Class says it's crazy how the goalposts have shifted from 2 weeks to flatten the curve to indefinite lockdowns and human rights abuses until we get a viable vaccine. A vaccine is nice, but not necessary. Don't believe anyone telling you otherwise. I agree. There's no need for it. 0.003% chance in a COVID infection rate in PEI causes government panic. 4 in 160,000 people do not a pandemic wave make. This is fear-based public health. The triumph of this precautionary principle without proportion is hurting our democracy. Yeah, and governing by decree, by public health order is not working. Here's BC. This is yesterday. BC is extending measures until January 8th. This means social gatherings are banned in BC through Christmas and New Year's. All events banned in BC until January 8th. Most holiday events are canceled. The province will allow drive-in events. There are some rules around this, but there will be some allowance for holiday events that include driving through lights and remaining in cars. The ban on adult sports continues. Travel for all teams still banned. Kids' sports cannot include games. Not closing school early for winter break. Dr. Henry says the exposure events reflect community spread, but there has been very few spread in school. Schools are a really safe place. This extrapolates. They are manipulating and lying about the data. Back to this. Dr. Henry says they have decided that there's no rationale to closing schools earlier, extending breaks, and the downside would be much greater. Parents would revolt. It's not acceptable to close schools. It isn't. And another unacceptable thing is asymptomatic testing in schools. Asymptomatic testing is underway at 4 Toronto high schools. The program previously uncovered outbreaks at 2 East York schools and closed them. Why are we testing healthy people? This is an expensive waste of resources. $45 a test. 60,000 tests a day times 45. That's 1.5 million. I think I did the math on 50,000 maybe. But regardless, it's a lot of money every day. We're just pissing it away to find what? People who are carrying fragments of a virus because we're using a PCR test to amplify the rate too high. It's maddening because the people play. This is a game. Understand, this is a game structure, and people who are playing the game outnumber the people who aren't playing the game. And it's very frustrating because the game is stupid. It is not based in any kind of reality. This is based on faulty testing. Here's Ottawa Public Health. This is incredible. This is incredible. Hold on. I'll show you where they kind of reverse. They say one thing and then do another. Okay. First, I don't like the cat. First, this is the first in their tweet thread. Excuse me, and it says sex, drugs, and Santa Claus. Okay, I don't like that because you're already appealing to a very interesting cross-section audience. And then here it is. It says, when things get really bad, stronger methods are needed, but we're not there now. Why not say, do not gather with anyone and be done with it? Because experience tells us that doesn't work. Look at the ill-fated Just Say No campaigns of the 80s and 90s. This holiday season, we're strongly... Okay, hold on. Yeah. So right after saying that it doesn't work, right after saying that, being firm about it and saying, do not gather, that experience tells us that doesn't work, they immediately follow it up with, this holiday season, we're strongly advising you that to only gather in person with members of your household. And if you live alone, 1 to 2 close supporters are okay. We know some of you may choose to gather with family and friends outside of your home, and you may travel. Don't do that. So we know that this doesn't work, and then they do it anyway. And this whole thread is just very, very interesting coming from a public health Twitter, like a blue check marked public health Twitter account. It seems like teenagers wrote it, very woke teenagers, and it's not appropriate. I don't know. It's inappropriate in a way that I would just ignore it because it's stupid and it's not based in reality, right? And people are going to visit their families, right? And there are going to be people who ignore it and people who who adhere to it, but people are going to do what they're going to do. And so I said the numbers in Guelph were 8 or 7 in hospital. Apparently there's 8, and we've had one more fatality in Guelph. That is a terrible tragedy. I'm sorry to hear that. But are these numbers overwhelming, right? Like it's pretty incredible that 8 people in hospital and one more death since July, right? Like that's the first death since July. And we've got these indicators. And realistically, respiratory viruses every year, this is flu season, kill people. Like this is not something new or unexpected. I'm sorry, people die. And I'm not meaning to be callous. My heart goes out to the family. But this is not a reason to shut down our economy. This is not a reason to justify the shutdown and lockdown of a city, right? Here's York Region's top public health doctor not convinced lockdown will bring COVID-19 cases down in the region. Hey, finally, somebody's talking sense, right? Ontario reports more than 1,900 new COVID-19 cases, a new record in the province. So the guy earlier was saying, oh yeah, cases aren't going crazy. Yeah, sure. For the second consecutive day, Ontario has set a record for the new number of COVID-19 infections reported in a 24-hour period. I wonder how many tests they did. York Region, which has seen new cases climb over the past week, remains in the red or control zone of the province's reopening framework. And speaking to CP24 on Sunday, Dr. Karim Kurji, the region's medical officer of health, said he remains unconvinced that a full lockdown is needed in York Region. Our modeling studies, why are we still using modeling? Why are people not demanding a better analysis of what's happened rather than modeling out? I don't like the idea of modeling. It's all math-based, and your assumptions can change the model quite a lot. Anyway, our modeling studies already show that going into the lockdown zone is not necessarily going to be benefiting us as much in terms of any real gains. Our cases aren't arising from the retail establishments, nor are they arising from restaurants or gyms, he said. So we're not necessarily too convinced that going into the lockdown zone would necessarily help bring cases down. He added that while York Region hospitals are increasingly being challenged, the situation isn't as dire in Toronto or Peel Region. Our hospitals are getting scratched, they're getting increasingly challenged, but I'm not hearing the sort of crisis calls that you're hearing from, say, Brampton hospitals or from Scarborough hospitals when Toronto went into lockdown, he said. Kurji said that when it comes to case and contact management, the region is doing quite well, reaching almost all new confirmed cases within 24 hours. We continue to monitor the situation on a daily basis, and we'll be in touch with the Chief Medical Officer of Health, transmitting our information to him on Tuesday, he said. I mean, it's good news to hear a doctor who is saying that we don't need lockdowns. I'd love to hear more of them say that. Here's a judge that says that too. Pandemic shutdown of small businesses unfair, Ontario judge says. There's one, the Sun story, and this is just some tweets collected. Apparently the hearing is actually today. I think it's actually happened at 10 o'clock this morning, so maybe it's already done. I don't know. But interesting case from Ontario challenging current lockdown and seeking an injunction. The applicant lost, but the judge raised concerns with the lockdown measures. And here's what the judge asked. However, I have little understanding of the public interest assessment behind the COVID-19 regulatory regime. Everyone sees the apparent unfairness of small stores closing while big box stores remain open. Are there issues about trying to change the public's habits during the shutdown? That is, are stores shut down not just for the risks they present, but to try and get people to see that it is not business as usual and they should just stay home. They should stay home. Even if apparently unfair, has the government made a policy choice to favor a small number of very large stores to contain risks while people do necessary shopping, If the applicant's store stays open, does that have a cascading effect on others or undermine the containment effort? And some additional observations about irreparable harm during the high retail season. Although the applicant's alleged losses are monetary, in the absence of any mechanism for it to seek compensation, it seems to me that the losses, if any, may well amount to irreparable harm. Will the applicant suffer irreparable harm if it is not allowed to open? The applicant says that it will suffer loss of revenue in the order of $500,000 if its stores are not open this weekend. How speculative that may be is an evidentiary question that may involve assessing how fungible in-person sales and online sales may be. It also may turn on whether customers have competitive alternatives or whether they likely just wait for the applicants to reopen with the current shutdown when the current shutdown ends. The applicant notes that it suffered losses as a result of being wrongly shut down by the government. Its losses will not be easily recoverable. No government counsel before me today pointed to a ready mechanism for a business to obtain compensation for being wrongfully shut down under the COVID-19 regime. One may exist in the legislation being relied upon by the government or at a common law, but I am not aware of any at this moment. The applicant also says that under the regulatory regime, the governments have shut it down without having to undertake to pay its damages as it would in a civil proceeding. The regulation has cast the burden on the applicant to move for relief. So, and apparently the injunction itself will be heard today. He says tomorrow, or they say tomorrow. This endorsement was related to an interim relief. So yeah, interesting. Here's the whole article. I'm not going to read it because I read the meaty parts here, but very interesting. Very interesting. Links in the description if you want to check it out. MPP Randy Hillier's claims son tasered by police in face mask dispute at Perth bar. I saw some people saying that they didn't believe Randy Hillier's version of events, and I thought, like, what an evil thing to insert into the public zeitgeist, right? Like, why? Just because you disagree with him? It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating because, like, this happened, and it's interesting that if somebody was being assaultive, basically they're saying that Randy's son was being assaultive, but they charged him under the Reopening Ontario Act. If somebody's being assaulted, they didn't charge him under the Criminal Act? Or I mean, like, that's a crime, isn't it? Assaulting a police officer? He got tasered. So very, very interesting with what's happening, right? Very interesting, very scary, very chilling. And by chilling, I mean meant to change behavior of people to stop doing what they would normally do, because the police will taser you. If you stand up for your friend and say, hey, buddy, he's mask exempt, you're going to get tasered, right? Very, very, very frustrating. So moving out of COVID a little bit, here is Trudeau's timed his pundit class saying Trudeau's timed his morning show appearances to conflict with the ethics committee happening at the same time. This is known as jamming, and it works well on parliamentary press gallery journalists who like shiny objects, like Justin Trudeau's cottage address. Here's a speech by Mr. Poilievre talking about how the government CPP, our pension plan, has been managed and depoliticized. So it's got a third party managing it, and it's bringing in returns, and now it's a very, very rich $500 billion. And Mr. Poilievre is worried that the government is going after that. So he spends 2 minutes, 20 seconds going over that, and I think it's worth a watch. Go check it out. Paper tiger or not, I mean, at least we have somebody talking about real issues and real things that can actually be solved. But the problem is, the more problems that get layered on, the more bad legislation, the more bad taxes, the more spending, the less accountability, the more they bankrupt the Auditor General, the more they don't fund them, the more they gaslight and double down on cases, the less likely it is that we're able to solve this problem in a way that is that can put things back together again, right? Like Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall, and if you've seen a broken egg, well, that's tough to put back together again, right? And that's what we're looking at right now with Canada and our finances and our COVID culture, and how do we even get back to a culture that you could look at in the mid 90s to 2005 Paul Martin days, let's say, and say, yes, this is what being Canadian looks like, right? Like, this is what being a Canadian is all about. And we were very proud of our nation at that point in time, right? What's happened? My goodness. Anyway, Michael Sabia, a busy Mandarin, heads to the top post at finance. Remember the guy who's the head of the infrastructure bank that did nothing, hasn't completed a project yet, and he got a big bonus just recently, and now he's moving, after not completing any projects, now he's moving into the finance minister, the deputy minister spot, to take over, to help out Ms. Freeland in crafting her communist crashing of the economy. Yay! Here's an exchange between Mr. Cooper, and he's talking. They're asking him about hiring and employing Mr. Poilievre's wife, who's been in politics before they got married. Blah 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 blah. And she's a good staffer, and she works in Mr. Cooper's office. And he says that I think what's at issue is when a Liberal member of Parliament violates the rules, covers it up, and lies about it. Yeah, that's essentially it. So yeah, it's an interesting video. Champagne hints at progress in case of detained Canadians, but mum on Meng Wanzhou deal. So apparently there's overtures of the U.S. and China in talks about freeing Miss Wanzhou, and apparently that is loosening the potential for the two Michaels to be released. I don't know. It's been years. My goodness, like this has been a long time. It's been a long debacle, and I still don't know how it's going to end, right? It's like the presidential election. Who knows? Who knows at this point in time? I still think Trump's going to do it. National Post, the speaker people who hired Justin Trudeau's mother and brother, and maybe paid Justin too, through We, They say, we have been dragged into the political firestorm of we scandals. Head of speaker agencies tells MP. Oh, poor us. How dare you bring us into your petty little squabbles? We just paid the Prime Minister's family lots of money, right? We just negotiated deals between we and the Prime Minister's family, and you want to know from us? How dare you? How dare you? This was interesting. Bullied Quebec student awarded $65,000 after school ruled to have failed to provide racism-free environment. A Quebec mother and her 2 children have been awarded $65,000 by the province's Human Rights Commission, which found against the Montreal area's school board over allegations of racism, aggression, and failure to provide racism-free school environment. The mother, identified by her first name, Asha, to protect her children, said the case involved racist bullying and harassment over a 3-year span before she pulled her son, now 12, and her daughter, now 14, out of the school. The children are Black. The Rights Commission investigated the complaints and found evidence of anti-Black comments from other students, with school authorities not doing enough to end the discrimination. Instead, authorities often blamed Asha's son under the pretext of having a difficult personality and questioned the seriousness of the incidents. The commission also found that he was the victim of differential treatment when it came to disciplinary measures, downplayed when he was a victim, but severely punished when he was the initiator of the altercation. Interesting that they have to, they mentioned the difficult personality, right? Could the difficult personality be to blame instead of maybe his skin color? Could that be what's impacting here? No, $65,000 question. It was racism, and you didn't do enough. How dare you? How dare you? Right? So that's where we are in Canada. We are in serious trouble, but I say that a lot, don't I? My goodness. Yes, we are. I mean, I don't know a way around to saying that. And a lot of the serious trouble is because, like I was talking about with the finances, the COVID stuff is, they're so invested in this now. Millions, billions have been spent. So much money, PPE, retraining people. Businesses have done this, have gone for PPE. There's so much invested in the COVID everything, infrastructure, right? It's almost got a whole life of its own. And in that life of its own, the government is plunging billions of dollars into old ex-MPs' ventilator businesses, medical businesses. Lucky that ex-Liberal MP's got a ventilator business that doesn't have any approvals anywhere, but he can make ventilators, that we're not using. But, whatever. Billions of dollars by the government sunk into this, right? Lots and lots of money by the provincial government. I don't have exact figures, but lots. And they're not going to easily undo this. This is just like the carbon tax. Like, this is, if you've seen the MIT professor explain how the carbon tax is like its own sub-economy that you and I don't get to touch, that's exactly what this is like. Oh, we've got to buy the PPE. We've got to have the masks for you, right? Cover your face and cover your input into your mouth and into your lungs, right? And make sure you breathe in all that bacteria that sits on the mask. Unbelievable. And people aren't pushing back against this, right? People are pushing back against this, right? $65,000? Maybe it wasn't the fact that he had Black skin. Maybe it was because he had a difficult personality. Maybe that has more to do with it. Maybe they need better training on how to deal with people with difficult personalities. Anyway, regardless. That's enough out of me. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out SpeakingMoistly.co. We'll be recording with Greg again today. And have a wonderful, wonderful day.